In a universe ruled by unstoppable aliens, harnessing incredibly advanced technology and manipulating black holes at will. Capable of obliterating entire galaxies, an orphaned child sets out on a dangerous journey to find his mother. The story becomes even more interesting when some armed people were in a building and began scanning all the area around them. One of them noticed something moving. They all pointed their guns forward, and when they turned on their flashlights, there was a little kid who had countless scars on his body. He tried his hardest to run away from them, but they caught him with a net. After some time, that kid opens his eyes and finds himself lying on a bed. The bright sunlight was blinding, and the place was a children's shelter. As he slowly tries to get up, he finds this place too strange because of the smooth floor, fresh clothes, and meals that arrived on schedule. The child spent most of his time on the hill. When some kids found him alone, they tried to pull him with them to play together. Like an animal, he crouched down and screamed loudly, scaring all the other kids away. Suddenly, he saw a butterfly near his head and started to play with it. A red-haired woman watched him from a window. She asks a girl if the kid is unable to speak. The girl denies it, explaining that he simply hasn't learned how yet, and that the rescue team mentioned he probably grew up with animals. When she says it's literally Mowgli, the other girl looks puzzled. The red-haired woman laughs, remarking that young people may not know, and that's understandable. She adds that it's from a story before he came. A bell starts ringing on the roof of a house, and all the kids started gathering near a young girl. Our MC began curiously watching them, as that girl begins to hand some letters to the kids. Suddenly, he hears a voice telling him it's a letter. A red-haired little girl explains that it was sent by a sponsor, and sometimes they send gifts. She asks if he doesn't have a sponsor, but he doesn't answer her. She starts dragging him along with her, and they end up burying him in the soil as they argue about adults deciding that half are kind and half are bad. While they eat together, the girl talks about a huge toy given to someone by a sponsor who wouldn't stop bragging about it. They're both together when she mentions that Lily's sponsor bought her clothes. While studying, she tells him that Joe even talked with his sponsor, and it's really disgusting. Afterward, she says she doesn't need a sponsor because her mom promised to come and get her. They're hiding under a table at night when she explains that after she sleeps for just 100 nights, her mom will come, and 100 nights will pass in the blink of an eye. Then, she sadly tells him she hopes her mom comes soon. As he listened to her grievances and aspirations, he gazed at the night sky and blinked while looking at the stars. It felt as if the stars were passing by quickly. Showing an alien toy to them, someone said they came down from the farthest reaches of space. A teacher was explaining to the children how they all became friends. A kid with glasses says that was not true. One of them asked why the teacher would lie. He responded that it was obviously because they thought they were little babies. He then placed a big book in front of them. Curious, another child asked where he got it. He replied that he had taken it from the principal's office. Flipping through the pages, he began explaining that a long time ago, aliens arrived on Earth. Humans fought back using a super powerful weapon called HAEK, but the aliens ate it, and in the end, the humans had no choice but to surrender. One of the children frowned and asked why the aliens would eat a weapon. The kid with glasses shrugged and said it was simple, they were just hungry. The bell of the tower rang once more, and all the kids gathered around a young girl who was distributing letters. She called out the name Mori, who was our protagonist, and handed him a letter that had just arrived for him. As he holds the letter in his hands, he examines it closely. The young girl tells him that he has a sponsor now and asks if he isn't happy. Suddenly, he hears the clang of a bucket hitting the ground and turns to look. Mori notices that little red-haired girl standing there, her eyes filled up with tears. After that, she sat crying under a table. When Mori arrived, she told him to go away, and he started pacing around the room. Suddenly, she heard a cracking sound and turned to see what it was. A broken cookie lay on the floor, and Mori stood nearby looking nervous. She asks if these are the only things he treasures and sadly picks up the cookie. She hides her face and says that in reality 100 nights have already passed, but her mom still thinks she can't count to 100. Tears stream down her face as she murmurs that she is all alone now. Suddenly, Mori leans against her back. Confused, she turns around, but soon breaks into a quiet smile. She suddenly pulls out the cookie and asks if she can truly eat it, which makes Mori uneasy. She then waves the cookie in the air in front of the drooling Mori, and they burst into laughter playing under the table. Then she realizes he is illiterate, so she takes the letter from him and notices that it only says hello there. Confused, she turns the letter upside down to check if there's anything more. Mori notices something falling down. It was a stunning, radiant blue crystallized flower. He is astonished to see such a thing. After a while, he is holding the same flower, while all the other children around him sleep. When he brings the flower close to his nose and inhales its scent, he is mesmerized by its fragrance. Soon after, he drifts into a peaceful sleep. The tower bell rang once more, and a girl called out to Mori excitedly showing him a new letter. Meanwhile, the red-haired woman handed him several gifts commenting that Mori is so lucky. When his friends arrived, they were astonished to find Mori seated amidst a towering pile of presents. The red-haired girl starts reading his letter, but it consists of basic words and still has untidy handwriting while his other friends eagerly inspect his gifts. There was a talking doll and a set of colored crayons. They wondered who this person was and why they were being so generous. They thought perhaps they were incredibly wealthy, or maybe they had some hidden motive. The vibrant crayons gleamed brightly, drawing Mori's attention even more. Just as he was about to eat one, they quickly stopped him. When the red-haired girl showed him how to use it, the realization hit him like a lightning bolt, and time went by just like that. The weather was warm, so the children decided to help with the laundry. They eagerly rolled up their pants and began washing the clothes with their tiny feet, some even turning it into a playful game. Perplexed, the red-haired girl wondered what was so fascinating about it. As Mori stepped on the clothes, little colorful bubbles formed, making him even more excited, until he suddenly slipped and tumbled into the bucket. Someone called out to the red-haired girl as she warned Mori not to step too hard. Just then she turned around in confusion and saw a woman rushing toward her calling her by the name Radina. Overcome with joy, she dashed forward, accidentally toppling the bucket. As she reached the woman, she threw her arms around her, crying out, calling her mom. As Radina embraced her mother in front of the other orphaned children, Mori stood there completely stunned, watching the scene unfold before him. The next day her eyes were swollen from crying, and she told Mori to take care. She cautioned him not to eat too fast, or he'd end up with indigestion. Then she handed him her shoes and a small bag, gently telling him not to walk around barefoot anymore. Suddenly, she began crying again, looking even more endearing, and quickly wrapped her arms around him. Through her tears, she told him he absolutely had to be happy. Mori smiled and held her just as tightly in return. After some time had passed, Radina stood with her mother, bidding farewell to the other orphaned kids. Among them, Mori silently watched everything unfold. Then, without a word, he went back to sitting on the hill once again. Even though the absence of a friend left a big hole in his heart, he didn't feel lonely, because the letters and gifts someone had sent were still by his side. The cloak was as soft and comforting as warm sunlight, the colorful crayons and talking doll brought him so much joy, and the kind letters carried the gentle scent of fragrant wildflowers. As Mori breathed in the delicate scent of flowers and the letter, his memories began to surface. He recalled the time when his friends eagerly speculated about the sender's identity, and, in that moment, the image of Radina's joyful face filled his mind. Then Mori pondered whether this person could be his mother. Mori gathered his belongings and placed them in the bag his friend had given him. He glanced back one last time and bid farewell to the orphanage in the distance. As he took his first steps, he noticed a railway ahead. He began following the tracks and set off on an unknown path to meet his mom. A herd of cows was resting when one of them wandered to a pile of dried grass and licked Mori with its long tongue, waking him. He wiped his hair with his tiny hands. He was on a train, staring out of the door, unaware that the train he had boarded without hesitation was already carrying him on a long journey to reunite with his mother. Mori stepped onto the ground, bidding farewell to the halted train. He gazed ahead for a while before venturing alone into the vast desert. There was nothing but endless sand and a few scattered rocks trembling from a distant rumble. Puzzled, Mori turned around. In the far distance, a cloud of dust rose as figures approached. They were humanoid aliens speeding toward him on bikes, armed with guns. A wave of fear washed over him as he tried to flee, but they swiftly surrounded him from all sides. A figure with red skin, white hair, and a black jacket watched from a cliff as the humanoid aliens surrounded Mori. The aliens questioned whether he was truly human, as Mori had crouched like an animal. They were debating whether this was truly a human and questioning why it was so small. One of them wondered if they could still sell it, which made Mori even more uneasy. Another alien suggested taking a small bite. As he moved closer to Mori, he remarked that it was so small nobody would even notice, and that just one leg wouldn't make a difference. Meanwhile, someone was approaching from behind. Suddenly, another alien slammed him to the ground, demanding to know who gave him permission to touch it as he pleased. The alien quickly apologized, addressing him as boss. The boss glanced at Mori and commented that something this size wouldn't even reach the liver. But then he hesitated as if realizing something. Suddenly, one of the aliens' heads burst into pieces. They all froze in fear, realizing it was a bullet. Someone was approaching them from a distance. It was an alien with multiple eyes and 2 horns, riding a sleek, intimidating-looking bike equipped with 2 machine guns. The boss calls him Ryder and directs his goons not to panic, assuring them it's just one. They opened fire on him, but Ryder accelerated his bike even faster, easily dodging every shot. The alien boss grew angrier and charged forward, preparing his right hand to strike. Ryder pushed his speed to the limit, and a massive explosion erupted. As the dust settled down, there was nothing under the alien boss's hand, leaving him stunned. Ryder burst from the dust above the alien boss's head and began charging his gun with green energy. He fired a powerful plasma beam, causing the ground to crack into pieces. Mori shielded his eyes from the dust. Ryder slid his bike to a sharp stop. To his left, a colossal crater scarred the ground. He gets into an argument with someone and then turns back to look. He notices a frightened Mori standing there. Ryder stares down at him with his multiple eyes, wondering what this is now, while an enraged Mori glares back at him. Ryder calls out to Annie. A small AI emerges from his back and scans Mori before informing Ryder that it's a human infant. Suddenly, Ryder smiles, calling him Little One, making Mori confused. He assures him not to worry now that he is here and introduces him to his friend Annie, whom he created. He assures him that this Ryder will take him home, making naive Mori believe him. He orders Mori to follow him and smiles while contemplating his next move. He thinks that eating humans isn't illegal, but socially it's considered taboo. He assumes this one isn't worth eating anyway. It might be tender, but there's too little meat, and they would barely get 300. Still, he figures it's not bad money and wonders if they should sell it alive to the caves, as some eccentric folks might want it as a toy. He also notes that despite its scruffiness, its clothes look surprisingly fine and considers putting it up for auction. The Ryder's eyes fell on the symbol engraved on the backside of Mori's cloak. He calls him Little One and asks him to wait while he checks what's there. He freezes in shock upon seeing it. Then, he gets up laughing and says it's already too late. He apologizes to Mori, saying he was just too occupied. He hops back onto his bike, remarks that Mori can find his way back on his own, and speeds away from there. He looks back and sees no one there. He mentions that symbol and assumes he nearly ruined his life there. Annie calls it chickening out, and the furious Ryder snaps at her to shut up. When he says that it left his throat dry, someone hands him a water bottle, and he thanks them. Just as he's about to drink it, he suddenly stops. Realizing something, he becomes completely bewildered. He looks down and sees that the person is none other than Mori. The Ryder starts yelling at Mori and tries to force him off his bike. A small rock rolls into their path, introducing itself, and they are sent flying. After some time, as the Ryder regains consciousness, he clutches his head in pain and notices something wrapped around his body. He picks them up and realizes they are letters. Suddenly, Mori appears before him with wide-open eyes, terrifying the Ryder to the point of death. Annie exclaims that he is finally awake and explains that they were worried his body temperature might drop, so the person beside him covered him with some items and started a fire. The Ryder expresses his gratitude to both of them. Annie says he needs some rehydration, and the Ryder decides to drink some water. Mori hastily rushes off and returns with a water bottle, but a smiling rock gets in his way, causing him to spill the entire contents onto the Ryder's face. The Ryder becomes completely drenched. Mori realizes his blunder and quickly searches through his small bag for something. The Ryder begins looking closely at Mori, who is peacefully sorting out his things. He sees that symbol and all his doubts become clear. It was Patch, one of the 7 fingers of the beginning and end of the universe. Only the owner of the patch and those they permit can use this symbol. To carelessly threaten others with it is like hastening their death to the next day. The Ryder grows uneasy and checks his throat. However, he thinks a human who seems somewhat deficient, yet has a symbol engraved on most of their belongings with costly paper, worth a month's food budget, and letters filled with affection. The Ryder becomes assured that if they safely deliver the child, they can surely claim a reward. Annie mentions that the battery is running low. The Ryder advises him to get some rest, and as his bike starts to dematerialize, he surveys the desert and memorizes the path to the city. While walking, a lizard observes them, and the Ryder remarks that someone like him, a lifesaver, is rare to find in life. Some time later, the lizard found its partner, while the Ryder boasted that he was the only one who truly knew the area. After the lizard passed away as its family wept, Mori and the Ryder were still wandering through the desert. The Ryder speaks to Mori but notices him in the distance, preoccupied with something. Frustrated, the Ryder calls out, demanding how he dares not pay attention while he's speaking. But Mori was in the middle of eating a strange insect. The Ryder is struck speechless by shock and hurriedly tries to make Mori spit it out. He felt relieved at last, knowing he had succeeded. He begins to shout at Mori, but Mori looks away, and the Ryder firmly tries to turn his face towards him. He explains that if the legs have a bluish tint like this, they might be poisonous, and if the roots are swollen and round or turn blue, when threatened they are definitely poisonous. The Ryder asks if he understands, and Mori nods. He thought there shouldn't be any more trouble now, but was startled to see Mori removing a tube from his bike. He yelled at Mori again when he saw him touching a dangerous cactus-like plant. Later, Mori got stuck in a swamp, and the Ryder washed him up, scolding him once more. Eventually, he lay on the ground completely drained, reflecting on his life choices. He looks at Mori, who is drawing something. The rider slowly crawls toward him to see what he is working on today. Mori mumbles something and shows him the drawings, but the rider doesn't understand what he is saying. The rider notices a box with Mori written on it and wonders if it is a name. He points at a drawn figure wearing a black jacket and asks what the black thing is. Mori points at his face. Shocked rider tries to confirm it again. The rider takes a closer look at the drawing and stares at it for a long time. It was the first time anyone had drawn him. Annie teases him, saying he seems to be in a good mood, and the flustered rider fiercely denies it. Annie glances at the drawing, assuming that the flat round figure must be him, and remarks that while the observation skills are decent, the descriptive ability is lacking. He gives it 50 points. The rider grins and suggests that Mori should draw him in a more impressive way, and the night passes like that. The next day, as the sun rises, the rider checks their location while standing on a cliff. He estimates that once they cross that hill, they will reach their destination. He becomes furious when he sees Mori run off without listening. He warns that if Mori doesn't hurry, he will leave him behind. However, he suddenly grows confused upon spotting Mori with an unfamiliar creature and wonders if it is a wild beast. Suddenly, the ground trembles and another of its kind emerges to protect the small creature. It places a blazing palm on Mori's shoulder and radiates intense flames across its body, deepening the rider's concern for Mori. Rider aimed his gun at the creature, shouting at it. As he fired a shot, the larger one swiftly attempted to shield the smaller one, and Rider rushed towards Mori. When Rider finally reached Mori, despair overtook him as he saw the flickering flames, fearing the child would be reduced to ashes, leaving no trace. But at that moment, the cloak billowed, and before Rider and Annie's stunned eyes, it extinguished the flames one by one like an enchanted veil. Within the cloak was a black void, and Mori collapsed after it was all over. They stood there in shock, horrified by its power. Worried, Rider asks Mori if he's okay. He begins carefully checking Mori and almost stumbles in shock. Angrily, he glances back, points his gun at the creature, and starts shouting at it. The creature moves to protect the smaller one, argues back, but Rider can't understand him and demands to know if he's pretending to be the victim. The creature grows nervous when Rider asks if his child is the only one here and shouts that Mori nearly became barbecue. As they argue, someone silently approaches them. As the ground starts to shake, Annie warns Rider that something is coming from below. Suddenly, a massive earthworm-like alien emerges and begins circling them, towering over Rider and Mori. Rider realizes it's an adult. At first, he decides he must send Mori back. Annie warns him that it's approaching, but the creature gently bonks the small one that was arguing with Rider and bows its head in apology along with the other creature. Rider is utterly baffled by this and shouts that he won't let them off easily. Then the small creature moves closer to Mori, leaving him puzzled. It offers him a shiny stone, mesmerizing him. Mori eagerly rummages through his bag and pulls out a feather for the creature. Overjoyed, they begin playfully circling around a confused Rider. After that, they left on the back of the large creature, and the small yellow creature happily looked at Mori. Rider also glanced at Mori, who was tightly holding his cloak. He tells Mori he survived because of that cloak. He explains that it's a magical item with excellent protection and likely has temperature-regulating abilities as well. He tells him to be grateful to whoever gave it to him. Joyfully, Mori begins circling around him again. After nightfall, they both slept on the ground near a fire, and Rider reflected on the moment with Mori. He calls out to Annie and orders him to display the data on humans. A digital screen starts loading before his eyes, and Annie informs him that this is all the data they have. Rider says the child must have a mother. Annie looks confused, so Rider explains that, unlike them who divide, humans reproduce. Long ago, when the Masters of Earth briefly left for space and then returned, numerous new life forms had emerged in their absence. Among them was a creature driven by immense greed and violent aggression called humans. They convinced themselves that everything, from a single blade of grass beneath their feet to other humans, belonged to them. Over time, their population gradually dwindled and disappeared. Seeing how things have turned out, Rider assumes the powerful ones didn't care much about their offspring. He glances at Mori, who is peacefully asleep. He moves closer and examines his tiny hands. Mori unconsciously grasps his thumb while resting near Rider and smiles adorably, captivating Rider with his charm. When he playfully pokes Mori's cheek, Mori shifts away, making the moment even more delightful for Rider. On the other side, someone says the forest surrounding the shelter is completely biodetected, adding that they couldn't have missed it and that it's probably because of the cloak. An alien with 4 eyes responds that he will find it without fail, while Rider continues playing with Mori, completely unaware of what's happening. The next day, Mori is still asleep when he slowly opens his eyes and finds himself in a vibrant meadow. He gets to his feet and looks around, his eyes widening in awe at its breathtaking beauty. But then he slowly opens his eyes again, and it was all a dream, and he is traveling with Rider on his bike. Ryder tells Mori to take a look and points out the stunning view of the city. In the heart of the bustling market, Mori gazes up, noticing unusual architecture with unfamiliar people wandering about. They both became alert as a loud scream echoed. They saw some aliens mesmerized by Mori's cuteness. They all surrounded him and began showering him with praises, making him even more nervous. Ryder pulled Mori away from them and yelled, demanding if they had any idea how much it cost. He then declared that if they wanted to see it, they must pay, driving them away. Ryder lets out a sigh, realizing Mori draws even more attention than he expected. He steps into an area filled with peculiar aliens. Inside, Ryder becomes furious when some aliens take an interest in Mori and ask if he is the child's owner and whether they may touch him. An alien with yellow hair and two horns approaches and demands to know what's going on. Ryder addresses him as Valentine. He grows curious about Ryder's intentions and asks when he decided to raise a human. Ryder firmly responds that it's not food and warns him against getting any strange ideas. Amused, Valentine laughs and remarks that no one eats humans these days, calling it barbaric. Ryder presents one of Mori's letters and asks if he has seen the symbol before. Valentine is taken aback and asserts that the symbol serves as his payment. He recalls encountering it once during a trade negotiation, most likely in the city. A nervous Ryder asks if this is their home, and Valentine confirms it. He gestures toward Mori's black hair, noting that the man he bargained with had black hair as well. Ryder questions why they would come here, to which he responds that there is a reason for it. Ryder then tries to purchase some parts for his bike, leading to a heated bargaining session where they shout back and forth. Meanwhile, Mori and Annie play together. In the end, Valentine offers a price of 42 and firmly states that he cannot go any lower. Ryder dumps all his belongings on the ground, and Annie suggests selling a battery with 70% charge remaining. However, Ryder insists that it would be a waste to do so. Annie suggests selling Mori's letters, and Ryder asks if she expects him to starve to death. He notices the yellow stone given by that creature and shows it to Valentine, asking how much it would sell for, making Mori anxious. Valentine recognizes it as a Tomas stone and suddenly smashes it into pieces on the table. Mori furiously tries to attack him, but Ryder holds him back. Valentine tells them to take a closer look as the stone begins to tremble. They are both stunned as it restores itself. Valentine explains that since it absorbs light, it glows at night. Ryder asks if it is valuable, and Valentine replies that it has become so common lately that it is practically worthless. As Ryder drops the stone, Mori tries to catch it, but it rolls away. He follows it, weaving through a crowd of aliens. Just as he reaches for the stone, a strange black hand grabs it at the same time. Confused, Mori looks up and spots a sinister-looking alien with 4 hands. The alien eerily mutters, "Very cute," and moves towards Mori, prompting him to run away. Suddenly, the alien grabs Mori by the collar and stuffs him into a strange space beneath his clothes. As Mori tumbles inside, the alien briefly checks on him before sealing the entrance and scanning his surroundings to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, trapped in the darkness, Mori desperately bangs against the enclosure, making noise and calling for help. While Ryder is chatting with Valentine, he begins to worry and looks around for Mori. Suddenly, he notices something unusual, an alien trying to slip away quietly, as if avoiding attention. Just before leaving, the alien glances back at Ryder with a nervous look in its eyes, which only deepens Ryder's suspicion. Ryder chases after him and tries to stop him, but the alien slips into the main street, blending in with the crowd. Ryder keeps pursuing him while instructing Annie to scan the area. Just as Ryder reaches out to grab him, the alien leaps off the bridge. Ryder looks down and sees the alien landing on another bridge below. The alien glances back at Ryder, who angrily shouts at him, as Annie reports a life form with a temperature of 36.8 degrees Celsius detected in his pocket. He tells Annie he needs to get ahead and cut them off. Ryder sprints in the same direction as the alien, while Annie follows from the other side, scanning the town and generating a virtual map. Analyzing the data on her digital screens, she calculates 14 possible routes. Based on the alien's speed and direction, she determines Route 2 as the most likely path and begins guiding Ryder, who quickly ascends the stairs ahead. Meanwhile, the alien searches for a hiding spot as Ryder pushes himself to run at full speed. Annie directs him to head towards the bridge on the left as the alien makes a U-turn. A female alien is proudly showing some kids her masterpiece when Ryder suddenly dashes past, completely wrecking it. She struggles to hold back her tears as Ryder keeps running. As the alien tries to escape, Annie approaches from the opposite direction. She instructs Ryder, who is plowing through everything in his path, to switch to Route 11. As the alien flees, Mori struggles with the violent shaking of the bag, completely terrified. Annie alerts Ryder that they are nearing the predicted destination point. The path ahead is blocked by yellow tape. Pushing through it, he finds himself at a dead end and anxiously asks Annie if she's serious. Annie quickly checks her map and urges Ryder to act immediately. He jumps down from that height, his white hair-like tail hitting the rocks and causing him pain. As the alien spots Ryder falling, he makes a U-turn, but is caught off guard as Annie appears above him in her bike form, blocking his escape. Now he is trapped between Annie and Ryder. He weakly asks Ryder who he is and why he is chasing him so aggressively. Ryder shouts for Mori, urging him to respond if he can hear him. Faint noises emerge from the alien's clothes. Annie scans the sound and confirms with 98% certainty that it's Mori. Ryder angrily demands the alien return his human. The bewildered alien asks what he is talking about. Ryder warns him not to play dumb, insisting that he has a tiny human in his pocket. The alien responds that he doesn't know what Ryder is talking about and brazenly lies, claiming he has been raising it all along. He questions why Ryder is trying to take something he raised himself. Annie informs Ryder that Mori's fear level is rising, making him even angrier. He points his gun at the alien, shouting for him to stop talking nonsense and hand Mori over immediately. The alien flatly refuses, saying Mori is too cute and that he has decided to raise him. Then he recognizes Ryder and describes him as a gullible outlaw with a forbidden creation, adding that he is quite notorious. He asks how someone as dangerous as him could raise a human. He claims he could raise him with greater love. He asserts that Ryder is keeping this child because he cares for him too. He questions how he is any different. Ryder says that if he is so certain, he should ask Mori whom they would prefer to be with. He responds that it doesn't matter. Ryder begins reloading his gun and dematerializes Annie. The alien warns him that firing a weapon in town will place him on the wanted list. He replies ominously that it doesn't matter, while Mori desperately cries for help. Mori is terrified because there seems to be no way out of this cramped, dim space. But as he sits down, he suddenly hears a voice speaking to him from the darkness. It's the doll his mother gave him, reminding him not to forget to use the bathroom before bed. On the other side, the alien proposes taking the head while the Ryder keeps the body. The energy level of his gun had reached 47%, enough to blow the head off. However, if that guy's pocket was muscle, it would contract forcefully upon impact, and the Ryder was uncertain whether the cloak would also prevent the compression. Angry Ryder was wondering if he could just get Mori out first. As the alien was speaking, he noticed something and looked down. He saw human waste flowing from his body and was revolted by it. He let out a loud scream as Mori peed in his pocket. A grin spreads across the Ryder's face as he notices Mori leaping out of the alien's pocket. The alien snarls, calling Mori filthy, his fury intensifying as he reaches out to seize him. However, a gunshot shatters his hand. He howls in agony and hurriedly scrambles to gather his scattered jewelry from the ground. Ryder points his gun at the alien's head and with a menacing tone firmly warns him to pay close attention. He makes it clear that if he dares to touch it with those filthy hands one more time, then he will be forced to crawl like a snake. The Ryder turns to check the source of the approaching voices, and when he looks back, the alien has vanished, as Annie suspects the gunshot was likely too loud. The Ryder swiftly materializes his bike, adjusts Mori's pants, and races away. As Mori clings to him, the Ryder exhales deeply, before breaking into joyful laughter. He starts imitating the moment and how flustered the alien had been earlier. Annie remarks that it was a truly ingenious method. Ryder commends Mori, saying well done. His little toy also tells him he is proud of him, and his mood shifts back to his usual cheerful self. He perches on Ryder's head, feeling majestic. Ryder asks Annie which direction they should take. Assessing the situation, she determines this is the fastest route, so they decide to head to the whale's cradle. Ryder angrily shouts at Mori not to climb any higher, and Annie urges both of them to stay still while he is driving. After some time, they were climbing a mountain. As they reached on its top, Mori becomes more amazed by how beautiful it looks from there. They wandered through forests and abandoned ruins with Mori playing alongside Annie. At times they camped outdoors, eating meat and avoiding dangerous creatures. One time when Ryder switched on his torch, he was beaten up by Mori, and Annie recorded in his database that Mori fears bright spotlights. As they traveled, they left messages behind. Annie picked up a wooden board, and he and Mori drifted in the water while playing with Ryder. As they approached a dark cave, numerous glowing eyes stared from within. As the monsters emerged from the cave, Ryder grabbed Mori and bolted while Annie took his left shoe. Some time later, Mori sat with Annie holding a crayon, and they had doodled on Ryder's sleeping face. After that, they rode a bike through breathtaking mountains and lush grasslands. Mori spotted a light in the distance and curiously gazed up at the sky. Giant whales soared through the sky, leaving him even more astonished. Among them, he spotted a baby whale drifting down near the surface. Mori raised his hand, reaching out to touch it. Ryder understood his intent and lifted him up in his arms. Enchanted, Mori gazed at the sky and raised his left hand again. As the baby whale floated above his head, it felt as if he were touching its fin, making the moment even more magical for him. They continued their journey like that. As Maury slept peacefully, he slowly opened his eyes and found himself cradled in a woman's gentle embrace as she comforted him with soft words. He closed his eyes and drifted back into sleep. When he woke up again, he found himself wrapped in a jacket. Ryder looked down at him, noticing he was awake. Ryder blames Annie for it, but Annie insists he was being cautious and tells him that if he's unsatisfied, he should drive himself. Ryder refuses, saying autonomous driving is a luxury. Annie mocks him, asking if he's incapable of doing anything without her. Annoyed, Ryder reminds her that he was the one who created her. Ryder stops his bike in front of a breathtaking snow-covered mountain and remarks that this place hasn't changed. Annie suggests they move quietly from here. Ryder reminds her that they saw them stirring at night and assumes that if those guys wake up and break their legs, they'll be forced to take the long way around. Ryder decides to show Maury something incredible. Annie questions if he isn't a bit over-equipped and wonders whether Maury can even walk. She thinks it's unnecessary since Maury also has that ultra-defensive cloak. Ryder responds that they can never be too sure what might happen. Besides, wouldn't it be fun to roll Maury up into a ball? Annie calls it abuse. As Ryder tries to convince a bewildered Maury, Annie notices something in the distant snowy mountains. She begins scanning the area and urgently calls out to Ryder, warning him of a fast-approaching presence. He wonders if they are hunters sent from town. Ryder is stunned when Aner calculates their speed at approximately 491 kilometers per hour. He focuses ahead, trying to spot who is approaching. As he waits, a sudden, overwhelming pressure emanates from the opposite direction. A bad feeling washes over him. He summons his bike, swiftly mounts it, and slams the accelerator. He pushes his speed to the limit. Annie assesses the closing distance and estimates 2 minutes and 45 seconds until his arrival. Annie calculated the remaining time to be 53 seconds. Maury curiously glanced back as a figure emerged from the snowy mountains, rapidly approaching. Annie detected him and swiftly alerted Ryder, who brought his bike to a sliding stop and aimed his gun forward, unleashing a powerful plasma beam. The energy of the shot vanished, leaving Ryder bewildered. His shock deepened as he spotted a black hole consuming the energy. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred, and Ryder protected Maury's body from the shockwave. A figure emerged from the thick snow dust, stepping forward. It was the same alien who had been tasked with finding something. Ryder couldn't believe it, and had never heard of a hunter capable of manipulating black holes. He questioned whether they would go so far as to hire someone like that just because he fired a few shots in town. The alien halted at a distance, but noticed Maury in Ryder's arms and silently observed him. Ryder asked Annie about his chances of victory if he went all out, and she responded with 16%. Stunned, he pressed for an explanation, and Annie clarified that there was a 7% margin of error accounting for natural disasters. He trusts Annie's probabilities to be highly accurate and concludes that the opponent is undoubtedly powerful. Determined to avoid a direct confrontation, he strategizes his next move. After a brief moment of thought, he points his gun forward and shouts, "It's now or never," before firing a plasma beam at a nearby mountain. Pushing his bike to its limits, he commands Annie to release the limiter. A warning flashes on the bike's display, indicating the activation of overclock mode. As he accelerates further, Annie cautions him to watch out for fractures due to the impact. He charges his gun and fires another plasma beam, striking a snowy mountain directly. An avalanche begins cascading down. Ryder pushes his bike to maximum output, believing that if they can just reach the bridge, they might have a chance to escape. He speeds ahead as the avalanche rapidly closes in behind them, but manages to escape safely. Pushing even faster, he shouts at Maury to hold on tight. Maury's face is smothered by the rushing air, and Ryder grows disoriented upon realizing the bridge ahead is completely gone. At that time, the alien was able to close the distance between them. Ryder whips out his gun and begins shooting plasma beams at the alien, but it easily blocks them with its black hole and continues chasing him. Ryder couldn't comprehend why that guy showed no intention of attacking and thought that if they could just reach the bridge like this, they might escape. But in that instant, the alien was suddenly right in front of his face. Stunned, Ryder's eyes widened as the alien grabbed him by the throat, tightening his grip around his neck. Ryder struggled, desperately thrashing his legs. Ryder pulls out his gun and shoots at the alien, but the black hole renders it ineffective. He seizes Ryder's hand with his white tentacle and tightens his grip around his throat. Ryder grits his teeth in anger as the alien turns to look at Maury. He starts bringing his hand closer to Maury, but sees his unwilling expression, which makes that alien surprised. As he gradually loosens his grip on Ryder's neck, Ryder quickly regains focus and leaps high into the air. He executes a backflip midair and plunges off the cliff. He asks Maury if he isn't familiar with this place. As they fall from the cliff, the alien rushes towards them, but is taken aback when a massive whale emerges with Ryder holding onto one of its fins. Ryder retrieves the bike, but the alien does nothing and merely watches Maury closely. Maury looks down at him as the whale begins to depart. After that, Ryder slowly wakes up in front of Annie and Maury. He asks if he passed out, and Annie explains that he was likely short of breath due to the sudden change in altitude. Ryder asks about Maury's condition, and Annie replies that he's fine. Annie commends Ryder for the strategy of awakening the sleeping whales. He wonders about their current location. As he scans his surroundings, he realizes they are in the city. First, Ryder puts Maury down, and they watch as the whales begin to leave. Ryder decides to go to the entrance now. Annie tells him they are unsure whether the warrant has reached the city and suggests he disguise himself. As his horns begin to dissolve, they curve downward and his hair cascades over his face. While shrugging off his jacket, he calls out to Maury, who turns back in bewilderment, leaving Ryder equally perplexed. Maury starts squirming and frantically searches for Ryder. Lifting Maury, who is anxiously trying to break free, Ryder tries to reassure him that it is him. Annie assumes he doesn't recognize him because his hairstyle has changed. Frustrated, Ryder asks what he is supposed to do now. An idea strikes Annie, and she sits on Maury's head wrapped in his cloak, while Maury sits on Ryder's head draped in his jacket. They start walking while arguing with each other, as it was uncomfortable. They suddenly stopped as someone greets them before the entrance of the city. It was a bot asking how it may assist them. Annie tells him they are here to meet the patch. He asks them to show the insignia. Maury begins to search for something. He takes out his bag, slamming it on Ryder's face. Annie shows him the letter. The bot presents them with a magical list from the owner to the members, who can all use the patch's insignia, and asks which one they are searching for. Worried, Ryder hadn't considered that they might be scattered in different places. Annie struggles to respond and wonders who they should go to. Maury glances up at the magic circle and rummages through his little bag. He pulls out the crystallized blue flower and shows it to the bot, which scans it and identifies only one person for it. He conjures a black door before them, but they fail to understand what it is and assume it to be some kind of portal. They circled around the black door and tried to touch it. The bot reassures them not to worry and explains that they will reach their destination regardless of the direction they walk. Annie thanks him. First, Ryder cautiously extends his hand into the portal before stepping through. They walk for a while inside and eventually emerge in a lush green grassland. They were both awestruck as they gazed upon a magnificent mansion nestled amidst lush grassland. Ryder asks what's up with that house, and Annie assumes it belongs to someone with a unique taste. Maury imagines it to look like his previous orphanage, which brightens his mood. He begins to approach it while Ryder slowly follows him. They were standing before the front gate, and Ryder mentions that they said someone could die if they enter the city without an invitation. He urges both of them to stick close to him. He tries to find a button he is supposed to press. Maury hears a voice and moves closer to the front gate. He spots someone near the window. As Maury watches closely, he sees a woman with long black hair that excites him, but she quickly disappears from sight. Maury swiftly squeezes through the front gate bars with his tiny body. He runs away while behind him an angry Ryder shouting at him. Maury comes close to that house and begins to climb through the window while Ryder was continuously warning him of the danger. Ryder nervously tries to press the doorbell, but there was nothing to open the door. Maury lands inside the house and finds himself in a long hallway. He notices an open door making a noise and quickly moves forward, eager to see his mom. He steps into the room and spots someone from behind, but it turns out to be a penguin-like alien. Confused, they ask who he is and how he got in. Maury grows even more nervous. While they are absorbed in discussing how they weren't expecting any guests and whether they should investigate, Maury hesitantly tries to slip away. Suddenly, the perfume of blue crystallized flowers catches his nose, and he starts looking around for it. They attempt to stop him, but he quickly dashes away. He notices another open door on the other side of the corridor. As he approaches it, he reaches out to open it, but suddenly bumps into someone carrying the same fragrance as blue crystallized flowers. He quickly looks up and notices countless eyes staring down at him, with eerie wings covering the person's face. Maury becomes speechless. He recalls the moment when Radina met her mom and then glances at that alien. She extends her hand, and Maury remembers his dreams of meeting his mom. As she tries to touch his head, he suddenly bursts into tears, his face adorably expressive. When Ryder arrives calling out to Maury, he starts crying even louder, troubling both the alien and Ryder. After some time passes and things settle down, Maury sits quietly under the bed facing a corner, while Ryder urges him to come out, and Annie gently tries to lure him with the promise of snacks. The other aliens were watching them while they were trying to convince Maury to come out. Ryder comes out from that room. The alien with wings on her head asks how it feels. Ryder responds that it isn't working and assumes he needs some time alone. She remarks that he looks really upset. He tells her it's the first time he has seen him cry like that. She assumes she wasn't as skilled as she believed, which surprises him. She greets Ryder and introduces herself as Miria, Maury's sponsor and the proprietor of Pei. As night falls, stars become visible through the window, and Ryder sleeps peacefully. Maury slowly emerges from the bed, his eyes swollen from excessive crying. He looks at Annie, who is recharging, and Ryder, who is asleep. Climbing onto the bed, he firmly slaps Ryder's face, but the drowsy Ryder groggily tells him not to do that. Maury shoots him a glare, then peers out through the door. He finds the corridor filled with moonlight and slowly begins crawl ahead while someone watches him from a corner. As he steps into the kitchen, he carefully tries to stand while looking ahead and notices some fruit on a shelf. He remembers Ryder suggesting he try those delicious fruits, but they were out of reach. Climbing a bit higher, he finally grabs one, filling him with joy. Just then, he hears a slurping sound and turns around. He notices Miria watching him from the doorway. Actually, she was lighting candles while sadly lost in thought. She heard sniffing sounds and turned around. She spotted Maury in the corridor, and for then she started observing him, but soon after Maury noticed her, which completely startled him, and he began frantically bouncing around the kitchen, which completely paralyzed her with fear, and she quickly fled. After some time, Maury finally settled down and swiftly found a hiding spot, while Miria remained concealed behind the wall. Suddenly, her gaze landed on some fruit. She observed them for a moment before picking one up. Then, she peeked into the kitchen and spotted Maury crouched behind the table. Realizing he was trying to reach the fruit, an idea sparked in her mind. She gently placed a fruit on the floor, letting it slowly roll until it stopped in front of Maury, who reacted with alarm. After a while, he calmed down, and the fruit remained untouched. Then, a tiny hand emerged from under the table, which Miria quickly noticed as Maury began eating it. Another fruit rolled to a stop in front of Maury. Wasting no time, he snatched it and quickly hid behind the table, which filled Miria with excitement. She kept repeating this for a while until Maury was completely satisfied. As the next day dawns, Maury wakes up to the sound of the maids and becomes alert. He quickly flees but almost collides with Ryder, who halts him with his tail. Maury looks up to see who it is. Ryder asks where he's rushing off to, while Annie notices something on his face and tells him to wash up. Suddenly, Maury clings to his leg and Ryder quickly scoops him up, exclaiming what's gotten into him this early in the morning. Annie smirks, remarking that his words may protest, but his actions tell the truth. He calls out to Maury and recalls what happened yesterday. Miria mentions that she isn't sure since Maury's language differs from that of humans and informs Ryder that Maury had left the shelter, so she only tracked him toward his home. She had no idea he would come this way and admits she doesn't know how to convey his gratitude. She places a box in front of the anxious Ryder and urges him to open it. As he hesitantly starts, he is stunned by what he finds inside. Inside was a stunning radiant crystal, which was actually a star fragment, and Ryder estimated it must be worth around 60,000. He became overjoyed realizing he was wealthy now. He let out a nervous laugh, then Miria expressed her gratitude for his hard work and decided to send her assistant to escort him out. But Ryder thought of Maury and his smile completely faded. He began reminiscing about every cherished moment spent with Maury and the adorable expression on Maury's face while sleeping. He suddenly mutters that he isn't ready yet, which leaves Miria completely baffled. A nervous Ryder urges her to consider that Maury cares about him deeply, so he can't be without him. He tells her that if he suddenly disappears, Maury will be devastated, and adds that he isn't exactly free either. He tries to assure her that he can stay by Maury's side until he adjusts. Miria asks if he can truly do that for them. While he is deeply engaged in the conversation, someone is heading towards them. When he turns back to look, he is horrified to see the four-eyed alien standing behind him. Miria introduces him as her assistant Giles. She asks for forgiveness for her rudeness, explaining that she initially mistook Ryder for a kidnapper trying to exploit Maury. Ryder responds that it's fine. The scene shifts back to the present where Annie asks, "Is that so?" Ryder covers Maury's ears and tells Annie to stay quiet, saying that Maury wouldn't understand difficult words anyway. She questions why he's covering Maury's ears if that's the case. He suggests that Maury explore the area with Annie while he talks things over with the others. Annie agrees that it's a good idea and Maury leaves. Miria welcomed everyone and invited them to sit wherever they felt comfortable. Once most had gathered, she began explaining the situation. They still hadn't been able to contact Shalom. Curious, Ryder interrupted and asked who Shalom was. The others laughed, teasing him and saying that everyone knew the judge. Their reaction annoyed Ryder, but before he could say anything, Miria continued. She explained that the judge was the master of earth and the ruler of life. His 2 arms wielded the omnipotence of weight, while his 3 legs commanded the authority of balance. Along with her, Patch, and 7 others, they had been granted the power to open black holes for him. Shalom was one of those 7. Miria then added that the black hole Giles had used was actually a fragment of her own power, something she had lent him. She went on to explain that Shalom's domain stretched from the mountain range to the river of Reden. Finally, she pointed out that the shelter where Maury had stayed was located in this very forest. It was all under Shalom's authority, so they had to communicate through Shalom, even when Maury vanished. She assumes they couldn't reach Shalom from the shelter, and also hadn't received the usual newsletter about Maury for several weeks, which is why they were delayed in searching for him. One of them says it's probably nothing serious, as Shalom is an exceptionally busy person, and these days once they drift into sleep it's difficult to meet them. Miria decides to continue sending messages, since they have no idea what's happening, and instructs Ryder to stay with Maury, and not move until they contact Shalom. He responds understood. Beside him the maid rises ominously asking if they should begin the real meeting. Ryder wonders what the real meeting is. She takes out some tiny tableware to display, leaving Ryder completely baffled, especially by its size. Ryder asks what is this? She answers it's Maury's personal tableware, which she crafted yesterday. Ryder exclaims asking how he's supposed to eat with this, but she replies Maury is incredibly small, only as big as a finger. Ryder questions if he's some kind of ant. While others try to calm her down, another maid approaches Ryder, saying she anticipated this, and made plenty. She leads them to a giant bed for Maury, who enjoys staying underneath it, where he can even split 40 times. The others also eagerly show Ryder the things they have made for Maury. Ryder silently chuckles and thinks they are really getting excited. Meanwhile, Maury was with Annie, who was showing him around the house. Occasionally Maury would draw on the floor and glance out the window. Then they played in the kitchen. After that, Maury pointed at various objects while Annie told him what they were. Suddenly he pointed at something strange that Annie didn't recognize. Maury attempts to climb onto it, assuming it's leftover material from a previous project. Once on the table, he carefully examines the drawings. Annie recognizes them as handmade items and tells Maury she is referring to his cloak. As he gazes at the drawings, memories of the gift sent to his orphanage resurface. He gently touches the sketch with his tiny hands, envisioning Miria working on these creations, making him deeply understand her feelings. Someone arrives and calls out to Maury. It was the maid, explaining how much effort they put into stopping Miss Miria from leaving to search for him. She asks what they had been doing, and Annie says they were exploring the mansion. Noticing Maury fidgeting with his bag, she asks if they liked it. Annie says she doesn't understand how a building like this suddenly appeared in the city. The maid explains that this is a villa Miss Miria built herself because she wanted to understand Maury. Maury and Annie step out of the room just as Miria passes through the corridor. Maury locks eyes with her, but the moment she notices him he panics and bolts away, leaving her disheartened. Ryder catches the moment and takes note of it. He mulls it over, and after a day passes he finally speaks up, saying it would be best if they became friends. Miria's face lights up as she says that would be wonderful. Intrigued, Annie turns to Ryder and asks if he has any ideas on how to make that happen. Suddenly, a spark ignites in Ryder's mind, and they set Operation Befriend Maury into motion. The first strategy was snacks, with Miria offering her homemade cookies to Maury, but the plan flopped miserably since anyone could do that. Meanwhile, as they snacked on cookies, Ryder and Annie suddenly realized they had completely overlooked something. The second step was to spark Maury's interest by showcasing his favorite things. Ryder studies the situation intently and says, "Perfect," while Miria boldly stitches all of Maury's treasured items onto her outfit. Annie suddenly recalls seeing something similar in one of Maury's drawings. Following Ryder's plan, she casually strolls past him. As Miria approaches, Maury glances back at her and instantly shifts into his unusual state. She quickly apologizes, reassuring him that she'll return everything right away. The third step was to create a sense of familiarity using a bike. Ryder is convinced that Maury likes him, so doubling the effect will make an even bigger impact. Annie brings out the bike, and Ryder eagerly starts teaching Miria how to ride it. But with one reckless twist of the accelerator, the bike rockets forward, leaving Ryder barely hanging on while Maury bolts in the opposite direction. Annie smirks, casually mentioning that she's the one doing most of the driving these days, only adding fuel to Ryder's frustration. The fourth step was to recreate the moment Ryder first formed his friendship. Handing Miria his clothes, he explains that the other guy has agreed to play the villain, so when danger strikes, she can swoop in and save the day. A dark shadow looms over Maury as Giles suddenly steps forward. Ryder urges Miria that this is her chance, and she quickly swings the door open, only to freeze in shock. Maury has already taken Giles down. Ryder storms in, furious at the betrayal, shouting that they had agreed on bullying. They tried again and again, but every attempt ended in failure. As the night deepened, rain poured outside, filling the air with a steady rhythm. Maury slept peacefully on the bed, lost in his dreams, until a haunting memory surfaced, pulling him into a nightmare. He jolted awake, his breath unsteady. Glancing around the dark room, he found himself alone, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. As he sat there, a sudden bolt of lightning split the sky, its sharp crack sending shockwaves through the air. Maury jolted upright, his body tensing as fear took hold. Pressing himself into a corner, He stood frozen before slowly inching toward the door, cautiously pushing it open in search of someone. Meanwhile, Ryder remained completely absorbed in his latest modification. He cautiously made his way down the dim corridor as rain hammered against the windows. His eyes darted around anxiously until he spotted a faint glow from an open door ahead. Moving stealthily, he peeked inside and saw Miria resting in a chair by the crackling fireplace, lost in deep sleep. As he crawled toward the warmth of the fire, his eyes landed on a paper lying on the floor. It was a report on child behavior observation, leaving him puzzled. As he inched closer to the fire, a sudden crack of lightning tore through the sky, startling him. In his panic, he instinctively leaped onto Miria, burying his face against her. Still lost in sleep, she wrapped her arms around him in a gentle embrace, completely catching Mori off guard. He cautiously lifted his gaze, realizing she was still asleep. Gradually, he relaxed, settling into the warmth as he hugged her back. A strange sensation stirred within him as memories flooded his mind. The gifts she had given him. It slowly dawned on him that she was like a mother to him. As time passed away, Miria slowly blinks awake, wondering when she had fallen asleep. She decides to return to her room, but freezes in surprise upon finding Mori nestled in her arms. Confused, she wonders why he is there and how long he has been. As she glances around, she considers calling Ryder and Annie. Suddenly, Mori clings to her even tighter. She watches him silently, noticing how peacefully he rests in her embrace, and a deep blush creeps onto her face. Nervously, she wraps both arms around him, pulling him even closer. As time passes, morning arrives. Ryder stirs from his sleep, and Annie remarks good work, before adding that it took longer than expected. Ryder responds that he had run it for quite a while back then. Deciding not to push himself too much for now, he continues walking. The passing workers greet him, but their unusually excited reactions leave him puzzled. They eagerly bombard him with questions about his health. Suddenly, a letter arrives at their front door, and one of the workers grows anxious, too busy to retrieve it. Ryder reassures her that he'll handle it. She thanks him as he heads down to get it. Before crouching at the doorstep, she reminds him to deliver it to Miria. As he picks up the letter, it's a notice informing people that he is dangerous. The words leave him completely speechless. Just then, Miria calls out to him, making him jump in surprise. Ryder quickly hides the mail and nervously says Miria seems to be in a great mood this morning. She asks if it's that obvious and wonders if he's free today by any chance. He replies that he has all the time in the world. She says that's perfect and mentions something about Mori's clothes. Ryder forgot that he is currently being hunted. While thinking, he was so shocked to see Mori crying that he completely forgot and absent-mindedly told her it's good. She asks if they should start getting ready to head out, leaving Ryder utterly baffled, and he hesitantly asks where. She casually replies to the center, making his situation even worse. His heart sinks as he asks if she means the city center, and she cheerfully confirms it without a second thought. Ryder's stomach drops. He's in deep trouble. After that, some aliens ushered them into a peculiar white room that felt both strange and unfamiliar. Ryder, wearing a mask, questioned where they had arrived. Miria explained that this was a place where clothes were commonly tailored. The shop owner mentioned that designs could first be previewed virtually and tried on so modifications could be made instantly. Since the shop specialized in fully custom-made clothing, clients were required to visit in person, as it was a core part of the shop's unique philosophy. Miria added that human clothes were difficult to find, so it was wiser to rely on professionals rather than attempting to make them independently. The shop owner says they've heard plenty about Mori. He glares at her, and she expected it, acknowledging that they're quite imposing, but they were prepared for this. So they reveal the countermeasures obtained from Miria, effortlessly drawing his interest. Ryder warns that following so easily is dangerous, sending a chill through Miria as she rushes to Mori. Ryder recalls when he was utterly shaken and had never imagined a dedicated portal could stretch all the way here. He thinks the rich really are different, and that it was fortunate they didn't encounter anyone on the way here, but recalls asking Annie to locate the cameras. She begins scanning the area and reports that precise scanning is difficult due to security measures. However, she mentions there is one object with a lens behind Ryder, two in front, and security personnel within 5 meters outside the door. He thinks what he should do. He considers staying quiet for now and returning to the mansion, but wonders if he should quickly pack up and leave this place. As they lower the curtains, they unveil Mori in a bear costume holding a honeycomb. Ryder excitedly exclaims that it's adorable, but Annie questions why he's getting worked up and also asks Miria why she's crying. She adjusts the outfit on the panel before her and selects another, a jester costume with 2 wings on his head. A sharp cry escapes from Miria, and she quickly covers her mouth, insisting it's amazing, but Annie remarks that it merely seems that way. Then Ryder takes the digital screen from Miria and tries on a dress for Mori. He transforms into a heavy metal rock star with a four-wheeled bike and its handlebar made of a skull. Ryder excitedly exclaims this is it. But Anise quickly dismisses their approach, saying it makes no sense. Determined to do it himself, she steps forward and Mori's attire shifts into a Sunil-like form while advanced technology seamlessly integrates with his body. She excitedly exclaims it's perfect. The store owner, intrigued by the transformation, decides to give it a try himself. In a breathtaking moment, he morphs into a flowing dress with two wings sprouting from his head while Miria holds her steady in awe. They change Ryder's shirt while holding Mori, who's dressed in a tuxedo with a cookie near his mouth. Suddenly a thought crosses his mind that the wanted poster isn't his fault, and though firing a gun in town is illegal, it happened because Mori was kidnapped. He wonders if they'll truly understand. He calls out to Miria, saying he has something to share, but he hesitates midway, recalling the eerie alien's words questioning how someone as dangerous as him could raise a human, rendering him completely speechless. He also remembers when Miria mentioned that their guides would escort him on his way out, which only deepens his concern. He glances at Miria and Mori and asks if the letter written for Mori really means lovely circle because he's been wondering about its meaning for a while now. She rummages through her clothes and pulls out a picture, showing it to Ryder. It depicts a grassland with something barely discernible in the distance. Miria says it's Mori and explains that, as usual, she was handling documents when she came across a letter from Shalom. It resembled a flyer being handed out in the city, so she was about to disregard it, but she chose to play it instead. She finds herself in a vast, vibrant grassland and suddenly realizes it was a video all along. In the distance, a lone house catches her eye. Beyond it, a hill rises where someone sits hidden among the tall grass barely visible. Curiosity grips her as she strains to see more clearly. Standing there is little Mori gazing back at her. She is spellbound, exclaiming it's too round, and wonders how can something be that round. As the video nears its end, she receives the picture and concludes the story, but a radiant smile glows on her lips. She tells him they recorded from afar because Mori was afraid of the camera. Apparently, he was watching an ant. She adds that before she even realized it, she had already completed the sponsorship process and was picking out a gift for Mori. She asks if it seems a bit dull. He disagrees, saying it's a solid start, then silently mutters, unlike someone else. While Annie was selecting the best materials for Mori, a worker behind them struggled with his task and accidentally dropped the digital screen, causing the lights to shut off. She quickly apologizes and decides to turn it on immediately. Mori fidgeted with his tiny hands, but when the lights suddenly flickered on above his head, he froze in fear, staring up at the glowing round-shaped lamp as a wave of past trauma crashed over him.